Hello, PSI2000 students. We're into week 10, and that is the discussion of the courts interpreting the rights and responsibilities of Canadians under the Constitution. This week is a topic that has been discussed variously throughout the previous weeks of the course. But because of the importance of the judiciary, it's a key, I think, for us to spend a week on it specifically. And I think in particular, it's important for students to understand the distinction between collective and individual rights, and how that dynamic was changed with the advent of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982. So in this week's readings, I want you to think about that role of the Supreme Court through interpreting the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But there's another element to the courts that occurs at the federal court level and at other levels of the courts, which essentially provide adjudication for disputes around the implementation of acts of Parliament through the bureaucracy. And we talked last week about the central role of the bureaucracy in implementing the directives of the government that come through acts of Parliament or through other types of cabinet directives. The implementation of those, however, are not just automatically smooth flowing things. There are always going to be disputes. There are always going to be conflicts in the implementation of regulations and other instruments, policy instruments advanced by the bureaucracy to implement the will of the government. We see that, for example, in tax courts, when there's disputes over the implementation of the Tax Act vis-a-vis a corporation or an individual. We see that in federal court when there's a dispute over implementation, say, of a worker safety measure or any number of other different things, and there are thousands that the bureaucracy implements at any given time. So there's the high-level court and the implementation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms through decisions of the court when there's disputes. But there's also the administrative courts. I mean, the implementation or the adjudication of disputes around regulations, policies, taxes, land, demarcations, traffic issues, you name it. There's literally thousands of different areas of government activity where disputes can arise. So, the courts are arm's length, but they're a branch of the machinery of government. But it's more than just what you see on TV with respect to criminal law, or major civil cases where somebody's being sued for millions and it's dramatized in TV or dramatized on the news. There's the everyday issues of the implementation of the intentions of the government that result in appeals processes, disputes, legal cases, and there's literally hundreds of those going on at any given time throughout the country. And so just as the cabinet minister can't implement an act without the bureaucracy, the bureaucratic function and the intents of the government couldn't be implemented without some kind of a mechanism that adjudicated disputes. So the courts run up and down the whole gamut of government, and understanding the important role of the courts in enhancing the legitimacy of implementation of the intent of government is very, very important. If the court's legitimacy is called into question, you can imagine the problems that we would have. Then the bureaucracy would come into its legitimacy would be challenged, because there was no accepted way to adjudicate a dispute. So the dispute would perpetuate. There would be serious challenges to the legitimacy of the bureaucracy under those conditions. So you can understand the very significant role that the courts play in government, not just in criminal law or not just in civil cases between two private parties suing each other, but in the entire administration of the state up and down, including from the highest level, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, all the way down to a regulatory dispute over a traffic fine. Okay, that's really important for people to understand, and most Canadians are sort of not aware of the vital function that the courts play in the administration of government generally, not just in the high-profile cases, but the ongoing function and the sustaining of the legitimacy of government action through a unbiased adjudicated process, or what should be an unbiased adjudicative process, and understanding that context is particularly important because it explains a lot about the way the government can continue to function in complex areas where there are bound to be disputes. And remember, at the start of the course, we talked about different interpretations of what politics is. Some would confine it just to the government, and some would even narrow it to the elected arms of the government. Broader concept of the government, of the bureaucracy. But when you begin to talk about politics as being the politics of the state, then it brings in all those elements of the state that maintain its functioning. That includes the elected bodies, the bureaucracy, the courts, and other forms of power and influence that emanate from the power and influence of the state or of government, depending upon the concept you want to use. But clearly the courts perform a very vital function and in politics, not just in legal matters, but in the functioning of publicly legitimate political institutions. And that needs to be clearly understood for the student to understand the real scope of politics, political science, and of the governance landscape within the country. Okay, so we'll see you again next week. Bye.